Again, like I said, my name is Eric Edwards, and I want to thank you for attending today's webinar, taking advantage of your thrift savings plan. And, you're listening to this either because you love listening to podcasts or you're really looking forward to learning about how to maximize the usage of this thrift savings plan that you have access to. So the keynote is really to make certain that you have an idea of what it is and then how GIBA can help you with that. As I may mention, I'm one of the financial advisors here on staff, and our goal is to make certain that you feel comfortable with the information that you have available to you, your federal employee benefits, the retirement benefits that you're dealing with in relationship to everything else, any other money matters that might be on your mind. Our goal as a financial advisory team, in addition to holding those licenses, is that we also hold federal retirement consultant designations, which basically keeps us abreast of your federal employee benefits. And so whether it's the thrift savings plan or your pension or any other money matters, if you don't have anybody else to turn to, no other financial advisors, you can always turn to GIBA. That's exactly why we're here. We're all salaried employees, and our goal is to serve as that financial GPS, so to speak, to help you to navigate through what's going on as you're considering retirement. And wherever you are, there's a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life in their federal employment service. And my focus is to provide you a lot of, as much information as I possibly can within this hour, and really try to hit as many points as possible. So, what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to just make certain that we're good to go. Stop the video here. But what I want to just make certain that we're really noting here that, again, there's a lot of questions that we will be answering in this presentation. However, there's going to be many others that are going to require follow-up. So really, overall, please note that the information I am presenting is really to provide fundamental guidance to ensure that you really have a personal financial approach that's on track with your specific goals and how you envision your quality of life and retirement with your investments. I'm really recommending for you to make a point to meet with a financial advisor. Okay, if you don't have one, that's exactly why GIBA was created. A financial advisory team is here to serve you. So, as you're continuing through this, once we're done with the webinar, I'm going to ask for you to complete the survey. And if your questions hadn't been answered, or if you have additional questions, please make note of that so that when we follow up, we'll be able to touch base accordingly. Okay. All right. So let's get started. A little bit of information about me. I've been serving in the financial services industry for a little bit over 20 years. And as a matter of fact, been helping people in both the private as well as in the public sector. As for GIBA, some of you are already GIBA members. Many of you are federal employees that are eligible to join GIBA. So let me just give you some information on that. GIBA is a not-for-profit organization. It was started back in 1957 by the Intel community at a time when, really, believe it or not, they didn't have access to all the supplemental benefits. So GIBA offers a wide variety of insurance and financial services for all federal employees and retirees. So we're really focusing on specializing and providing our members with customized solutions for federal employees and their families. So, we've been around for over 65 years and counting, and we, really thankful to be able to serve over 16,000 active and retired federal employees. And then that's not to include any additional spouses or any sponsored family members as well. Now, as I say that, basically we initially started primarily focusing on the intelligence community. But then as of 2017, our board of directors wanted us to serve as a financial partner for all federal employees. So that makes us available to you. All right. And let's shift gears. We'll go through a lot of information here, but I'd like to touch on some quick market commentary. But before we even get into great detail, let's take a look at this quote from one of the most respected minds in investing, Warren Buffett. To invest successfully over a lifetime does not require a stratospheric IQ, unusual business insights, or inside information. What's needed is a sound intellectual framework for making decisions and the ability to keep emotions from eroding the framework. All right. So, key item to note, which sounds simple, but I can't say is really easy or even consistently reflected on, is that you don't need to be an expert mathematician or rocket scientist to invest successfully. We need to focus really on investing in a rational manner, considering how many months or how many years we'll be investing before we need to start withdrawing and using our savings and income. So once we determine the time frame and the growth potential we're seeking, one of the most challenging decisions is really what to do when our investments are challenged with market volatility. Now, here's the key, especially in the past couple of weeks and months, as you've seen, we must keep our emotions in check and stay the course for the investment plan as well as your career planning, and not make irrational investment decisions that we'll end up regretting. All right. So, looking at this slide here, just talking about basically considering the recent market volatility that we saw. We saw it back in 22 and most of 23. But regardless of when folks were planning to use their funds, it could be 5 or 10 or 15 years out even. People back then were acting on emotion, and a lot of people had moved money from maybe any of their stock investments, the C or the S fund, and moved it over into the G fund. And as a result, when people make those emotional decisions, they basically end up missing out on a lot. And towards the tail end of 2023, a lot of people who moved money into the G fund, they ended up missing out on the surprise market rally that happened toward the end of 2023 and then into 2024. Now, recently we are seeing bumps along the way, but really the whole key thing is that we have to really strive to act not emotionally, because when we do that, it's almost as if we're, say, selling a house at half the value. And then once that sale is actually done and we move maybe our investments, our stock investments, into a conservative investment, we lock in the loss, even though we didn't even need the money at that time. And it's like, okay, if you're retiring and you're going to start making withdrawals within a year, that might make a person want to harvest the gains and so to speak, stop the bleeding. But if you're not retiring or you're not going to use these funds for another 10 or 15 years, it really can be an irrational move. And when it comes to investing, specifically retirement planning in our TSP, we've got to focus on the long-term retirement and future income. Try not to allow those emotions to drive us to make those irrational decisions that really could quite honestly derail us, missing out on the greater growth potential long-term. All right, so this slide right here is talking about basically what we call the perils of selling at the bottom of the market. And we all know that you should sell high and buy low, right? I mean, that's what most of us always talk about. But by human nature, when things are going south, we kind of basically run for the hills. So we end up going to the G fund, and then on paper it looks like it's safe. But really, that is an opportunity that if you're still making contributions into your Thrift Savings Plan or any retirement plan, that's an opportunity for you to continue to make those contributions. Because, like what we're showing here is like, going back to 2000, from 2003 all the way up to 2025, the pivotal point in 2008, where many long-term investors made different decisions. The blue line represents someone that stayed invested through the various crises. The red line represents investors who moved to cash for 1 year and then got back into their portfolios and reinvested. And then at the bottom, the yellow line indicates those of us who moved to cash and quite frankly never went back. And as you can see, investors who were disciplined enough with their goals and emotions and weathered the storm from the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, they really benefited from a greater reward of staying focused on the long-term goals. So here's another slide here talking about the probabilities of long-term investing and how it can really be on your side. And this slide reflects a cumulative performance of a balanced portfolio. So a balanced portfolio is where you have 60% of stock, So that could be in either your C fund or your S fund or your I funds. And then the conservative, 40% of it being conservative, where you have it in either the G and or the F funds. And in this situation, you could see the differences in the return opportunity. Here's another one where we're talking about the risk for stock market losses fall over time. What we're trying to drive home is really staying invested for the long term. So from 1926 all the way up to 2016, there's been lots of different returns after a certain period of time for the, and a lot of different financial crises. In 1989, you had the savings and loan crisis. 1998, you had the long-term capital management bailout. In 2000, we know that as the dot-com bubble burst. People were getting laid off and things were looking crazy. And then of course, on top of that, 2001, we had the terrorist attacks. And then of course, the most we've had 2008. That's been the biggest, most recent one, which was the banking and credit crisis. All right. So here we're showing a 1 year, 5 year, and 15-year return. And even with short-term losses, the overall long-term rate of return is basically always not negative. So for instance, looking at the bottom line, the bottom portion, the 15-year annualized rates of return, it's 100% that you would have a positive rate of return through year 15. If we zoom in on the issues of the present instead of zooming out to focus on why we're invested, the purpose of us investing, and really focusing on that long term, that we'll make more prudent decisions for a long-term investment approach, and we won't fall short by making irrational decisions based on short-term circumstances. All right, so now timing the market. That's always so funny because you look at this beautiful day, just figuring a couple of weeks ago it was freezing outside. But realistically speaking, timing the market is virtually impossible. It's like a 0.00034% chance of timing the market. And we're not really in the market timing business as financial advisors. Our focus as financial planners are really to help our investors manage how they invest, when, as well as when and how they access their savings in order to meet their short-term and long-term goals. Now, the chart shows annualized returns based on missing positive trading days from 2009 to 2000. I'm sorry, from 2000 to 2019 here, and you could see the amount of trading because of the volatility experienced between 2008 and 9. But so basically, the investor who's weathered the storm and stayed invested was rewarded over the 20-year period. Now, this graph really shows the activity over 5,000 trading days. You had very, very lows, and then you had very, very highs. And really, it just shows you that if you stay the course over time, stay consistent, that basically over the last 20 years, if a person had done that, they would have been rewarded. Now, if a person would have pulled out, maybe they would have ended up missing out on probably the 10 best days. Then the return goes down by 2.4%. They missed out on the best 20 days. Then they're losing even more. And if you missed out on the best 30 days, 50 days, or maybe out of 5,000 days, it shows that you would have really had a negative annualized rate of return. And long term, that doesn't pay out. All right, stock market performance. Again, we're trying to just drive home here that it's vital to stay the course. Reflect on your purpose for the investment and follow your plan. And working with the most, with most of the federal employees like yourselves, we found here at GIBA that because you possess pensions as well as Social Security, which is in essence a second pension, depending on also really what your monthly expenses are, if you need to look at your outside investments as a paycheck to help you subsidize those expenses, or a playcheck, all that's going to have really a role in the decision making on whether or not you need to be more conservative or if you could be more aggressive than the average. But really, the whole goal is having those two fixed incomes allow you to stay in the market much more because you're less reliant on your thrift savings plan or your outside funds to help you to meet a lot of your basic needs. So, and for retirees who don't need to rely on withdrawing from the retirement income on a periodic basis, especially when markets are down, our financial advisory team can provide you with the help on where and how to gain access to your, to income from those investments without really jeopardizing the long-term savings goal. All right, here. So now this is something, we're talking here. This is focused on sharing information with regard to international markets. Just recently, whereas there have been a lot of volatility in the U.S. market, the international markets have been showing a little bit of growth. And then you have even emerging markets, as far as these are countries that have developing nations and developing economies. You're looking at a scenario where it's, we never really know what aspect or area in the stock market is going to do well. And that's why it's important to really not only stay invested, but to really kind of look at diversification. And we'll look at this a little bit more. Wanted to share this information with you here because people are always considering, like if a specific president or specific party is in office, then there is greater growth over one than the other, or there's going to be worse, greater challenges. And the key thing is just to really stay invested. That's the bottom line. Regardless of who's in office, we don't have control over all outside of our votes that we do place. Once that person's in office, we really don't have a lot of control over that aspect. What we have control over is how we act and how we react specifically with our plans. All right, so fear is a natural response. I made mention about that, and I've been, kind of plugging that word emotion and irrational behavior a lot. Fear is a natural response, though, and I mean, you have to recognize your bias, though. So, the question is, you have to ask yourself, are you somebody who gets scared? There's lots of media, lots of headlines that are out there, just really telling us that the skies are falling, and that's why people are pulling everything into the G fund. So, and then all of a sudden there's like those 5 days of positive returns that really can make up for all those losses. And then when people do that, they end up missing out on those returns. And another aspect is maybe you think, well, when the markets are down, perhaps increased contributions. That could be other people. When they see that, it's like buying a house that's undervalued or half price originally noted. And it's an opportunity that if the market's down, I've got 10, 15 years to make contributions. Heck, let me go ahead and increase that opportunity because that house, in theory, will have an increased value eventually, and I'll be able to capitalize on that. So as you progress closer, you basically progress closer into your career where you are kind of at the point where you're about to close out into the time of life when the funds are going to be needed on a more consistent basis. Then that's when you really need to speak to a financial advisor. I would say, typically we would say within a 5 to 10 year period. But if you're at that, 1 year, 3 month mark, and you haven't spoken to someone and you don't feel confident, definitely make the phone call, reach out to GIBA or reach out to your financial advisor. Just make certain that you are getting the help that you need, because, really the whole focus is overall, don't forget the purpose of your investing. Socrates said, know thyself. And if you know what you have as far as your goals are, but then you also realize that you're an emotional person, you have to get the help that you need to navigate along the financial journey. You need a resource that helps you avoid allowing emotions to impede achieving your goals and the long-term progress. Okay, all right, here we go. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to be reviewing throughout the presentation, and really the importance of retirement planning. We're talking about having an overview of your federal retirement benefits. We're going to look at the TSP, identify the different investments within it, and then we're also going to talk about distribution strategies. All right, so when discussing financial planning for retirement, the first question I like to always ask our clients anytime I meet with a client here, is basically, what does your retirement look like? How do you envision life in retirement? For many people, this might be the first time folks have even thought about it because you're so busy with everything else in your life. A lot of you have had pretty long careers, within the federal government. Retirement might be, for many others, 20, 25, or 30 years out. I saw a few of you that are brand new to the federal government. So, the question is, what is it that you want to do once you've separated from federal employment? Do you want to stay local as far as living? Do you want to move? Do you want to travel? Are you going to transition into another career? You want to spend time with family, or you want to be a snowbird? No time is better than really right now, while you're thinking about this, to start documenting your goals, your dreams, really identify solid visions and put them on paper as far as how you envision life, because that's going to be just as important a part of your plan as some of the other hows and whats. Okay. That's something my teammates help people do every day. All right. So the different sources here for your retirement savings, you're going to look at the different pensions here. There's the FIRS system, which many of you are. There's about 14 or 15 of you here that have access to the CSRS Civil Service Retirement System pension. So you're going to also have, based on whether you worked outside the federal government before or after Social Security benefits. We've just had that recent legislation now, so that money's coming your way as well. Then we're looking at here other aspects of your retirement saving strategies. Now, it could be a combination of a thrift savings plan, or maybe like an old 403B or 457. Some of you may have traditional IRAs or Roth IRAs, or maybe even a qualified annuity. Then many of you may have a portion of your assets that are in non-retirement investments, such as maybe deposit savings accounts or CDs. And then there's people that may have investments, taxable accounts. They might buy stocks, or maybe different mutual funds, different annuities that are not really geared toward retirement, but can provide a lot of greater growth potential. All these components, most of our clients have exposure to each one of these categories. So the main takeaway from this is just really understanding what the strategy is behind utilizing the different resources for your retirement situation. Also understanding how to have really tax management. What's the best or the most efficient tax management strategy for your particular situation? What's going to be most efficient as well when we consider legacy planning, leaving assets behind to the next generation. There's a lot of things to consider, and there's definitely information like this. There are multiple sessions in order to get all of those things ironed out, but you can definitely find a guide here at GIBA. All right, so looking at retirement conversations here, you're knowing that we have all of these different components within your plan. Of the conversations that you're going to have with yourselves and with your loved ones, the fact is that if you have a domestic partner, a spouse, one of you might be living longer than the other person, and so typically you're going to look at a scenario where on average, women tend to live longer than men, and then some living expenses may decrease through retirement. Other expenses may increase, like taxation and healthcare. Depending on where you are in the country or what your personal situation is. So, for your planning approach, it's always going to be for you really to understand and identify how you can best access your financial dreams and goals, as well as how you can implement and maintain a savings approach that's going to provide you with efficient growth potential, access, and longevity. So we need to plan based on longevity and ensure that we're not outliving the assets that you've accumulated thus far. You can't outlive the pensions. As long as you have life, there will be pensions that'll be in existence, but those investments, they may play a different role, and how you end up dealing with that could be important. So again, really planning for a period of time is often the best way and the most conservative way to do it, considering people's longevity and healthcare availability, our GIBA's financial advisory team creates plans for folks with expectancy, basically with a life expectancy of age 95. And it's not like everyone is going to live to that age, but isn't it better to kind of really plan for that as opposed to not plan for that and then really need it because you are living that far? That's kind of my thought process. All right, longevity statistics. All right, so there's going to, like I said, there's a higher likelihood for women to live longer than men, and then at this stage, we're at a point where individuals that live to age 65, all those stats that are talked about with regard to longevity and things like that in nature, they kind of go out the window. I mean, you see that there's a 50% chance of living to 86, and then even a 25% chance of living up towards that age 93. So, GIBA's members and government employees have different, basically wages. They have, there's some that have high wage earners. Some people that may have higher life expectancies. There may be dual incomes within the household. And you got to look at it and basically most of the years since World War II, life expectancy in the U.S. has really been going up. And so the last time it was really kind of stuck, or at least in a mid-range, was in the 80s. But we're basically focused on seeing that if we're going to be living longer, we also end up having a lot of health complications. We need to really focus on preparing for all scenarios that might impact us financially. Retirement planning. Here, we're looking at a period of time, not a point in time. It's not like you press a button and then it's done. Going back to that previous slide we had where, there's lots of pieces to the puzzle. So, we're looking at a situation where we're focused on really identifying and fine tuning on the amount of money you're going to need to retire comfortably. And so that's going to depend on really when you retire, how much money you need in addition to your pension to live comfortably in retirement, what your retirement goals and dreams and plans are, as well as how long you live. So to figure out how much money you'll need to retire, you really got to look at your expenses and really keep a track on that, and then zero in on those expenses that will likely go down or up. All right, looking at the time value of money, because the key thing is in investing early, that could be your biggest ally, early and often. So it's like the time to start is like yesterday. Really focusing on saving as much as you can as soon as you can, so that the effect of compounding can give you the time really to have that money work for you. Now, this example, it really illustrates the impact of getting an early start on, really to kind of building that nest egg. So the blue bar represents a person we'll just call Don, who began investing $2,000 a year starting at age 25. And then the purple bar represents Dave, who began investing in $2,000 at 35, so 10 years later. Now, both aren't the same investment return, but by the time they turn 65, because Dawn started 10 years earlier, you see that she contributed just $20,000 more to her account, but then due to the power of compounding, she ended up with over $300,000 more than Dave. So, really the whole focus is just being consistent month after month, year after year. You have the capability with the Thrift Savings Plan to automatically have that deducted, which makes it really simple. Just making retirement your priority is the key. Because you can take a loan out for a car, you can take a loan out for education, but you can't borrow for retirement. That's the bottom line. The average period of time in retirement is about as much as you spend probably working, 20 to 30 years. So the goal is to really put away as much as you can now to pay yourself back down the road. And consider how long you're going to spend time and money when you retire. Really, I mean, it's really focused that a major focus is that you implement the plan and try to take your mind off of all of the intermediate ups and downs. Many of you feel highly confident about your plans, and that's great. And for those of you who don't, then I would, definitely encourage you to seek out services, financial advisor that can help you and help you feel more confident about what's going on. All right, so let's touch base on the benefits that you guys have with relationship to the pension. So regardless of if you are in the CSRS realm, CSRS offset, or within the FERS retirement system, all of you are eligible to contribute to the Thrift Savings Plan. All right, this slide is going to give you an idea of how the different benefits are actually calculated for FERS. And FERS, as far as how the FERS pensions are calculated, where you look at between 1% and 1.1% of the high 3 average salary for each year of service. Additionally, there'll be the FERS folks, you'll be able to take advantage of Social Security now. And this is, as a matter of fact, that's it's one thing I will say, that this slide needs to be corrected, because we were at the time prior to that aspect, there was still the pension offset situation, but you now are able to take advantage of that. CSRS folks are able to take advantage of having a pension. So CSRS as well as CSRS offset individuals, if you are Social Security eligible, then that income would also come into play. But you have an opportunity here with the Thrift Savings Plan. That's one of the bigger pictures here, specifically for this webinar, is that with individuals who are part of the FERS community, they will have matching contributions that'll go in up to 5%, whereas with the CSRS and CSRS offset communities, there would not be any matching contributions. However, it's still a valuable opportunity, because you can make higher contributions into an employer-sponsored plan such as the Thrift Savings Plan than you can making into an individual retirement account or a Roth IRA. All right, so here we go with we're going to start talking more about the three-legged stool: your pension, Social Security benefits, and then the TSP. Now, your pension and Social Security, as I mentioned, those are fixed incomes. All right, there's not much control over those. The biggest control that you have is when you press the button for those to take action. Those are basically future income annuities that you have been paying into, deductions coming from your paychecks. And then once you start, you press the button, basically you retire or you elect to take Social Security. That's when they become immediate annuities. Annuities provide guarantees, and those guarantees are that as long as you are living, the income will come out regardless of what the markets do. So once that started, though, again, there's not much control over that. So now, other than obviously how much money you earn between now and then, the time that you started. Now, the TSP is going to be the variable of this equation. This is the amount of assets that you would have contributed to your own retirement. And if you have matching contributions, then that would be in there as well. But it all depends on how well you've managed to have you've really managed that plan during the accumulation phase, making those contributions. All right, looking deeper into this here. The purpose of this Thrift Savings Plan here, we're looking at the Thrift Savings Plan is offered to all U.S. government employees, and it's one of the simplest and most efficient retirement plans in use today. So, this is why these employer plans are in place. But, it's crazy that while thousands of civilian and military employees defer a portion of this money into their plan, there's many participants that don't take advantage of it. And then there's folks that are making contributions, but then there's a lot of those people that are making contributions that don't understand, exactly how those contributions go in, and they're really unsure which of the funds that are within the TSP are really appropriate. So that's exactly why we're sitting down here to talk about that. So before we go into that, though, let's talk about really information here with relationship to the TSP. So looking at the perks, you figure, again, you're talking about automatic contributions. Now, this is one of the least inexpensive plans out here. Most employer plans are least least expensive. They're very inexpensive because you have a large population of people. The challenge is, though, there's not a lot of help with how to manage these things while you're working, and then there's even less once you retire, other than just taking distributions. However, the great part about it is once you become a federal employee, it's automatic enrollment as of 2020. So we're looking at a situation where you're making a contribution of up to 5%, and those contributions are going to be done directly from the payroll. So it make it really easy. Okay, here we're looking at the contributions as of 2025. You can contribute if you're under the age of 50. You can contribute up to $23,500 within a calendar year. And if you're over 50, then especially for folks that feel like they didn't have the capability, maybe they had kids and they want to be able to try to catch up now, the opportunity can be to add an additional $7,500 to it. So a person over 50 can contribute up to $31,000 to this plan and really build up that retirement if it makes sense. All right. So if you want to save and take home as much money as possible, then allocating to the traditional TSP could be an optional way to go. You're looking here again. You're looking at a situation where you're making pre-tax contributions. It'll lower your annual tax bill, but you're really deferring paying the taxes on that money until a later date if you're doing this traditional fashion here. So you're going to, regardless of whether a person does a traditional contribution or if they do a Roth contribution, the match will always be pre-tax. So that piece we won't be able to get away from. But for those individuals here, taking advantage of the Roth contributions, this is an opportunity where you can, although there is an opportunity to make this contribution, there aren't any income eligibility requirements. Whereas like the Roth IRA, you have to you have like basically a certain income limit. So irrespective of income, you're able to make those contributions, and you would make those contributions basically. Whereas with the traditional, the contribution is made pre-tax, and you can deduct that contribution amount. With the Roth, you're not able to deduct the contribution amount. You pay the taxes up front now. But the beauty is basically that money gets to grow, and any contributions that you've made that have growth will grow tax deferred. But then after at retirement, you're able to take that out 100% tax free. Now the employer, again, like I said, the employer match contributions do not get invested on the Roth side. They're still going to be on the traditional side. However, the key thing is you're basically giving yourself an opportunity to reduce taxation in the future. All right, so people are always asking this question, like, and should I do Roth? Should I do traditional? It's really tough to kind of decide. Everyone's situation is different. We always suggest that you speak with a tax advisor. Specifically, we can talk about tax advantages here at GIBA, and we're going to guide you. We're going to direct you to speaking to a tax advisor for that. So, but as you're making these contributions, always reflect, if anything, reflect on this slide. Okay, so if you're looking to go towards traditional, if you're expecting maybe to be in a higher tax bracket after retirement or during retirement, then you want to invest in the Roth aspect. If you think the taxes are going to rise, then yeah, that's an opportunity to go on a Roth. But then if you're looking to reduce your adjusted gross income for other tax benefits, then the traditional route's going to be the way that you go. Really, it's really focusing and ensuring that you are evaluating your entire savings approach. So not just money that you may have in a thrift savings plan, but if you have a partner, or if you have other outside investments, you want to look at all those pieces of the puzzle and really lay them out to make certain that you really design a blueprint for success. Okay, so yeah, as I was alluding to earlier, as far as your match, pretty much you can get a match up to 5%. So it's almost pretty much dollar for dollar of as long as you're making a contribution of up to 5% of your salary. So again, like I said, CSRS offset, you do not, you do have access to making contributions to the TSP, but there is no matching contribution. So even if you do 23,500, still the most you're going to get is 5% match of whatever your salary is. Okay, so now the key thing is, remember the 5% match is during each pay period. So we talked about the maximum here, as far as the maximum contributions, that we don't want to max out too early. I mean, our focus is we want to spread out the contributions so that we're able to take advantage of each contribution over all 26 pay periods, not just focusing on maybe getting all the bulk of it done in the beginning of the year, and then once you've maxed that out, then you're not able to do any more, because then you could be missing out on a lot of those contributions. So let's look at examples to really talk this through. Here's an example basically of how you can lose out on the free matching. So we're looking at Sean and Susan both making, let's say they're making a contribution of $3,400 per pay. Sean's going to contribute 25% of his pay, whereas Susan's going to contribute $903.84 per pay period. Okay, so looking on to the left, you'll see from pay period 1 to pay period 23, Sean's already maxed out in his contributions. And then to the right, where Susan, because she made contributions and was able to make contributions all the way to pay period 26, she was capable of reaching that same mark that Sean did, only she was able to get more of those matching contributions for those missing pay periods that Sean missed out on. And so the key thing really is to really focus on, making certain that you're spreading it out and you're not kind of like front loading it, because you could miss out on a lot of contributions. All right, here we go. The important, again, I can't stress enough here the importance of the TSP. Really focusing. If we only had the top two legs, the pension and the Social Security, in this situation, we're looking at about $65,000 a year for Sam. But then if you add in the potential income, then you're looking at an income stream of over $100,000 that could be provided for Sam here. Now, because it's just important, saving early, saving often, investing it in the right funds according to how long you're going to be contributing to the TSP, how far, as well as how far you are away from retirement. So in this situation here, we're looking at a situation where, we have $102,000 a year. Without the TSP, it's just $65,000. The opportunity is there for us to be able to provide a lot of growth and a lot of flexibility with our income. All right, so here we are with additional examples of a net paycheck, where you're looking at a situation where you're taking the advantage of investing in a thrift savings plan. Now, on the traditional side, we've got Roger. Regina's on the Roth side. Both monthly or weekly or biweekly paychecks are at $3,400. Now, Roger, he's making a pre-tax contribution of $680 after subtracting the federal income taxes. He has a net spendable income of $2,245 per month. And then you've got Regina on the other side, who's made a Roth IRA, or basically a Roth TSP contribution of $680, but factoring in taxes as well. So it's about $117 difference per pay period. But then, again, we're looking at the difference between what your paycheck would look like if you made a traditional contribution versus you made a Roth contribution. And the traditional TSP participant is taxed on average at about 18.3%, the Roth participant at 19.7. So you're going to be at a higher tax bracket now, but then when that money comes out at the at retirement, you're looking at tax-free income, 100% tax-free for that Roth distribution. All right. Again, the advantages of investing in the Roth tax-free income. You're looking at a scenario here where we had the future value of those contributions that Roger was making. Now, the $680 is now equivalent to $2,631 in the future. Then you subtract any type of federal income tax, and then you look at that situation where Regina's, hers was growing tax-free. In both scenarios, consider an assumption of investing each for a period of 20 years with the same 7% annual average rate of return. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here, okay? I'm going to be honest with you, but it's really about what your thoughts are on taxation and how much purchasing power you want in retirement. That's really the key. So if your income tax rate stays the same and there's no difference, then it's like, okay, what do I want? How do I want my purchasing power to look at retirement? All right, so many people ask and wonder, how do I make those changes for contributions? Most agencies have what's called a government retirement benefit system, and I believe you can also go into the TSP website. You can do it as well. You can have the various percentages change between Roth. You can do all Roth, you can do all traditional, or you can do a combination. And it doesn't matter what combination you do, like that doesn't change the fact that you have the capability that under age 50, what your contribution max is, or over age 50, what your contribution max is. So in addition to contributing while you're actively working as a government employee, see, you have this opportunity here where you could also pull funds into the TSP by contributing to them by doing like a transfer or rollover. If that was something that made sense, you could roll over funds from an old employer plan, or you could transfer funds over from an IRA. It really depends. You'd have to check, but you can only transfer taxable dollars into the TSP. So you can't bring Roth IRAs into the Roth TSP while you're working. You can only bring in traditional IRAs or other 401ks or 403bs or other employer plans. You can bring those monies into the plan, but not Roth money. If it's got Roth money mixed in, you won't be able to bring the Roth portion in. And then you can always make transfers into the TSP while you're working or in retirement, just so as long as you keep $200 in the account. So you can basically transfer all of it out, leave $200 in, and then maybe transfer back in if you had a desire to do so. All right, so we're going to go through and really look to see, under the hood, what does the TSP look like within the various accounts. We're going to, let you see what's, as far as the rates of return and things of that nature within the TSP. And what we have here is basically a financial pyramid. Now, not a Ponzi scheme, nothing crazy like that. All right. What we're illustrating is the relationship of the types of risks that you're taking with each one of the funds. All right. In the return that each of the funds are going to be giving based upon the risk. So at the top, we've got the I fund that stands for international. Now, although the amount of these types of funds may create greater risk within your portfolio, if allocated properly, you're going to be in a position where within your TSP that can provide you with the long-term growth potential that you'd be wanting to see from over the long term, whether it's 10, 15, 20, or 30 years out. And then if there's need to make changes, you can do that, or you can get some help with doing that. All right. So there's a number of things to consider when investing. Risk tolerance. And that means that you have to be comfortable. I've been talking about this before. Risk and emotion, they kind of go hand in hand. You have to be comfortable with the ups and downs of the investments, and you have to be able to sleep at night when the investments are down. All right. That's a big thing. Time horizon. That's another thing. It means that basically that your account, we want to look at it and kind of really determine when you're going to start using those funds as income, and not when you retire necessarily, because retirement may mean one thing, but if you're not looking to access it for another 15 to 20 years, it's important to take that into consideration. Now, understand your risk, because if you can find a level of comfort in knowing that even though you may have a riskier TSP mix now, in 10 to 20 years, the growth potential will provide you greater income opportunity. So now, if you're the type of person who's extremely risk adverse, using funds with lower growth potential, your savings will probably be more likely to end up with a lower purchasing power and inflation protection, which really means you'd be forced to have to save more to be able to have the purchasing power that you would want in 10, 20, 30 years time frame. Now, to people who want to invest and may be new to saving and market participating investments, risk may sound scary, so maybe substitute that word with comfort level. It makes my wife feel a whole lot better when we talk about it at home. All right, diversification. Diversification here, it's a planning method that we as financial advisors as well as investors use to balance the risk associated with different sectors of the market. We're talking about a mixture of stocks, bonds, CDs. They all have different risk factors and very different reward potential. So balancing these investments can add tremendous value to a portfolio and decrease your exposure to risk. So you're looking at a scenario where various aspects, depending on where you are in life, you want to focus on mixing a balance that's going to help you to feel confident about the long-term picture as it pertains to that comfort level that I reflected on. Okay, comfort level. Many of you probably have this. Some of you probably shy away from this. The G Fund. The G Fund invests in special non-marketable treasury securities issued specifically for the TSP by the U.S. government. Now, this fund is the only one in the TSP that guarantees the return of the investor's principal. It therefore has the lowest risk of the 5 individual funds. All right, it pays an interest that is calculated on the current market yield of all outstanding publicly traded treasuries, and with a maturity of at least 4 years. Now, the average maturity is really about 11 years, and the aggregate interest rate is adjusted monthly. The G Fund historically provides the lowest rate of return of any of the core funds. And so, considering the rates that we see now, with like the last time we've seen rates like this was back in 2007, nothing more than 4% since that time. All right, the F Fund. The F Fund purchases securities that exactly match the Barclays Capital U.S. Aggregate Bond Index. So these are bond funds. The index invests in a wide range of debt instruments, including publicly traded treasury and government agent securities, corporate and foreign bonds, as well as mortgage-backed securities. So keep in mind, as I'm sharing all these with you, past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but one could see that placing all of your money in the F Fund probably isn't the most prudent thing here. Looking at the inception, it's not that much more than where we were with the G Fund. All right, the C Fund. Right now, here we go. We've talked about the most conservative of the funds. Now we're looking at the C Fund here. This is definitely not conservative. We're looking at this is like a mirror reflection, a loose reflection of the S&P 500, consistent of the 500 large and mid-cap companies designed to match the Standard & Poor's S&P index. And so that being said, we're looking at year to date things. Yes, they've been looking kind of shaky. Prior years, though, reflect that it's definitely important to have that kind of exposure within at least a portion, if not all, especially in the beginning, in the earlier stages of one's career, really focusing on having that stock exposure to have that inflation protection. Another aspect here would be considering the S Fund. Now, as the name indicates, it's basically focused on smaller and less established companies than what might be on the S&P 500, but they have greater growth potential. Greater growth potential also means there's greater risk that's involved. So you might see some great spikes, but it is one of the two of the riskiest funds within the TSP. Then you've got the I fund. The I fund was the one that was at the highest point of the actual pyramid that we looked at earlier. This I fund stands for international, and it's one of the broader international indices that really invest in larger, more established companies located in really like the 22 most developed countries around the world. So we're not looking at any emerging markets like I reflected earlier, but really it's regarded as the other higher risk fund because it historically posted it has had some higher returns in the C fund in some situations right now, specifically, but in many cases, though, we're really looking at focusing on having a full diversified portfolio. And I'm speaking of all these individual funds, and some of you probably get a kick out of spending a lot of time and energy creating, controlling and adjusting those individual TSP funds. And that's great. My hat off to you. However, there's probably a lot of you that may end up getting overwhelmed with those choices, or maybe you just have a pretty busy life and you understand the importance of making those contributions. However, you don't have the time or you just don't want to put the effort towards reallocating. So you just want to be able to obtain growth potential for your retirement goals, focusing on, really putting that money in, set it and forget it. And that's exactly why the life cycle funds were created. And then you see here different life cycles. People want to select 1 or 2 or 3 life cycle funds. What I always encourage people to do is select, if you're going to go the life cycle route, select a life cycle fund that is in tune with when you think you may be starting to use these monies for retirement. So whether it's age 62 or age 67, or if you say to yourself, I'm not going to touch this money until age 70, whatever the case may be, that's the year that you should focus on, not the year in which you retire. Because what happens is these funds are going to be more aggressive in the the farther out it is, the closer it gets to the year in which we're living in, the more conservative these funds become. These are basically an aggregate. It's a mix of all 5 funds becoming more conservative and going towards the G and the F fund in the end. That's where the L income fund, 75% of it is in the G and F funds. So really focus on that, and there are tools that can help you to select the right one for you. Okay, here we are, the mutual fund window. Now, this is one that, again, there are some fees that are involved with this. This is not a part of that least expensive part. For individuals who wanted to have access to to other investments, but within the TSP platform, then this option is designed for those TSP participants who are interested in having those greater flexibility within the TSP platform. And then you can transfer money from your TSP account back and forth. And then once your account is established, you can buy, sell, and exchange mutual funds. But then again, there are certain eligibility requirements that you'd have to focus on. We're looking at a $55 annual administrative fee. There's a $95 annual maintenance fee, and each trade is $28.75 per trade. And then there could be other fees and expenses. So, the key thing is really to focus on what's going to be important to you. All right, here. So we're almost at this hour mark here. So I apologize for not getting through. There's still a few more slides left here. Again, make certain that you make a note within your survey if there's questions that haven't been answered. All right, so we're going to get past this here. Looking at withdrawals, in-service withdrawals, retirement withdrawals, you have an opportunity that if you're over the age of 59 and a half and you're still working, you can actually take those, you can actually make withdrawals, and there would not be any penalties for that. There are limitations to doing that, but you have a choice of either withdrawing them from the traditional or from the Roth side if you have that available to you. And then note, of course, if it's traditional, then it will be subject to taxes. There's a limitation to how often you can take those distributions, but that availability is there. So if you wanted to transfer money into a traditional IRA, you could surely do that. Or if it's a Roth IRA, whatever the case may be, if you wanted to have access to greater investment options, then you can actually do that. Retirement withdrawals, that is something that will be available, upon separation. Retirement, you have the capability of taking withdrawals to be, that can come directly to your checking account, or you could transfer money over into another employer plan or to a traditional or Roth IRA. Individuals who separate after age 55 have the capability of taking withdrawals directly from the Thrift Savings Plan without any 10% penalty. That would not apply if a person has retired or separated from the federal government after age 55. All right, TSP loans, not recommended, but if you need to have it, then you have access to that while you're working, and that's irrespective of whether you're 59 and a half or not, but you have the capability of taking loans from the Thrift Savings Plan and then basically paying that back. But just note that when you take loans from the Thrift Savings Plan, you're basically delaying your retirement growth. You're delaying retirement for yourself. So I would really encourage that if you're feeling like you're going to need a loan in the future, maybe consider lessening your contributions to no less than the 5%, but then putting that additional money in to build up a savings account so you don't have to lean on that. Required minimum distribution. So, whether, for some of you, many of you here, it's going to be age 73. Some of you, it may be age 75. But the key thing is, if you never have to access a Thrift Savings Plan, at some point you will be required, if you have traditional money in your account, you will be required to make a distribution, a required minimum distribution. And that's going to be calculated based upon the December 31st balance amount in relationship to your age 73 is a factor. And basically Uncle Sam saying if you don't take any money out, you got to take something out over time, and you have to be doing that on a required basis if you don't take money out for any other reason. All right, direct and indirect rollovers. This is all considered distributions. A direct rollover is one that, in essence, if you're transferring money from the Thrift Savings Plan to an IRA, a traditional or a Roth IRA, or another employer plan, that's called a custodian, a trustee to trustee transfer. That is a direct rollover. If you decide on pulling money from your Thrift Savings Plan and doing what's called an indirect rollover, if you take a distribution paid to you, you would in essence enact a 20% federal tax withholding automatically minimum, and then you would have 60 days to do that. It's a really tight situation. I would not encourage it. I would encourage that if you're looking at doing that, consult with a financial advisor so they can help you to do a tax-free transfer so you're not having any issues with Uncle Sam or the IRS. All right, so we talked about managing your contributions, making changes in beneficiaries. The whole focus is just really reviewing your contributions, making certain that your investments are you're allocated in the right manner. And if you're not, then selecting an L fund that's going to help you to do that. You want to make certain that you're really gauging that in relationship to your comfort level as well as your time horizon. And then you want to look at that tax diversification, determining whether or not you should be making traditional contributions or Roth contributions. You can go to the TSP website and make those changes. And if you have any questions, call the TSP line. They have people at an 800 number that'll be able to help you with making those changes if you're having issues with the self-service engines. One thing I would always encourage is for all accounts that you may have to ensure that your beneficiaries are updated. You can access your TSP website and make certain that your domestic partners or loved ones are listed so that if in case something does happen, there's not a worry and there's not a concern. All right. So what should you do with your portfolio? I would say definitely take some time to really make sure that your financial situation is in tune with what your income, expenses, assets, and liabilities look like. And you want to remember also save early, save often, and really focus on not selling out at a time where the emotions are shaky. If anything, consult someone before you make a decision like that. All right. Definitely stay the course, concentrate on your long-term goals, and really keep your head focused. And if you have any issues, any questions, any concerns, reach out to Giba, reach out to a financial advisor, reach out to someone you trust who knows what they're talking about with regard to financial planning. And, Giba, we've been around for over 65 years accounting. We're here to serve you with not only financial planning services, but several other services and solutions that are designed with you in mind. And if you have any questions, again, any additional questions that weren't answered because there was a lot of information and a lot of slides, please fill out that survey. I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the very best. Have a great evening.